Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Waterloo Park virtual tour presented by BBVA. My name is Homer Gonzalez. I'm the communications coordinator here at Waterloo Greenway, and we're so excited to give you all a sneak peek at Waterloo Park before it reopens this summer. Just a quick reminder that this tour is being recorded and will be shared on our website and social media channels later today. Feel free to ask us questions in the chat. We'll be answering them at the end of our presentation today. So today, join me in welcoming Lisa Storr. She's the project manager at the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department, and John Rigdon, our Director of Planning and Design here at Waterloo Greenway. Before we get started, just want to wish everyone a happy Earth Day. We're really glad that you're spending it here with us on our Waterloo Park virtual tour. Hey, John. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Homer.
Happy Earth Day, y'all.
Happy Earth Day.
All right, I'll go ahead and hand it over to y'all and we can get started with the tour.
Great, thanks, Homer. So first I'll start out with a little bit of context about the overall project along Waterloo Greenway, and then we'll dive into the specifics in Waterloo Park and give you all a virtual tour. So Waterloo Greenway is shown here in green. It's about 35 acres of new and restored public open space along a restored Waller Creek, and you can see Waller Creek there in white working its way down the eastern side of downtown. It'll be about 1.5 miles of creek and trail, kind of as the crow flies, ending at Lady Bird Lake. Next slide, please. Here's another view, and we just flipped it on its side to keep everyone on their toes. So north is to the right here and south is to the left. This zooms in a little bit more on those parks in the context of downtown. So you can see that this is really integrated into the downtown fabric next to the Red River Cultural District, the Mexican American Cultural Center, historic Rainy Street, and just on the eastern side of downtown before you get to I-35. Next slide, please. The park, the Greenway is comprised of kind of 3 primary parts. The first is a restored Waller Creek, which moves kind of 1.5 miles through the center of the Greenway. The second is improves connectivity through a system of trails, bridges, and connections to existing right-of-way all throughout this district, really stitching things together safely and accessibly. And the fourth component is the park spaces you see here. And these park spaces are going to be tackled in phases and really beginning at the north and south ends and then working our way in the middle. And so right now, today, we're going to talk about phase 1, which is Waterloo Park. So the furthest right there and the most northern portion of the project. Our next phase will be the southernmost portion of the project, which is from the lake to 4th Street. But today's focus will be on Waterloo Park. Next slide, please. Waterloo Park is 11.5 acres approximately of park space. It's been a park since the 70s and has seen a lot of events and activities throughout the years. However, has been closed through for the redevelopment of the tunnel, the flood control tunnel, and then for the construction of Waterloo Park. And we'll touch on both of those as we work our way through the site. But we're very excited to be reopening this park to the community really soon. Next slide, please. So here's an older rendering. This shows the vision for the space. One of the key components of the history of the park that we really wanted to continue and enhance was its use as a place for special events and gatherings. So here you can see a rendering of what one of those gatherings might look like in the very near future with a nighttime event at the Moody Amphitheater in Waterloo Park. Next slide, please. Here's a photo. We have drone photos and also a webcam that's constantly taking imagery of the park so we can track its progress and pop in there and see what's going on site from time to time. And this shows December 2019. So here you can see a lot of dirt, things really starting to come up out of the ground and not a lot of plants. Next slide, please. This is a photo from October of 2020. So, you can see the grass planted, the building complete, and we're really starting to get moving on the creek work. You can see kind of in the bottom right of your screen there, as well as some of the improvements to that bridge. Next slide, please. And here's a photo just today. So, you can see that everything is very close to completion. The building's done, the plants are in, the creek restoration work is complete. And one of the cool things that all these photos show is it really gives you a sense of where this is in the city and how centrally located it is to the Capitol, to downtown, to the Red River Cultural District, to UT and the new med school, which is just off to the right. So it's kind of really at the heart of a lot of things happening in our city. Next slide, please. So with that context, we're going to jump in. We're going to stop at various locations throughout the park. And Lisa and I are going to provide information and some interesting facts on what's happening in those areas. Next slide. Great. So we're going to start in the southeast corner of the park and work our way clockwise around the park for the most part. So we benefit from having these awesome aerial photos that we get through our drone photography from our construction manager. And DPR Construction is the firm building this project. So you'll be seeing folks from that crew on site in various photos that we're presenting here. I'll also add that the park itself was designed by Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates from New York, and the architecture work is Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners, as well as Michael Shue Office of Architecture, and I'll highlight some of those structures that each of those firms contributed to. So here in the southeast corner, you can see kind of in the foreground there, it looks like a lot of dirt and sidewalks, but what we're building here is a complex around a wetland. And so it'll be a wetland garden with pathways and critical connections to the other areas of the park. Next slide, please. So we'll pause here and take a look at this beautiful tree. One of the things that we all know as Texans is how important shade is. It's hard to enjoy a park, a handful of months of the year here if there's no shade. So this tree was relocated from an adjacent developer. And one of the things we've looked for is partnerships where we can relocate great heritage oak trees primarily from nearby properties and save them from being destroyed as development happens. So our neighbors and partners across the street at Graystar Development worked with us to relocate this tree here to the southeast corner, and it really provides an anchor in a shaded space in this area. Next slide, please.
Maybe I can just jump in too on that tree. Besides just the shade, it also provides a ton of ecosystem services, so habitat creation and a lot of other services that are important for urban ecology here. I did see a quick question that I'm just going to answer extemporaneously because it's pertinent, but there was a question about whether this tree, which looked brown in one of the drone photos, looks good now or is going to make it. And while this one was recently transplanted last June, I think, it is leafing out really well now. So we are very hopeful and we think this one will make it. It's a beautiful anchor to the corner, as John said.
Thanks, Lisa. This photo here shows just, some of the construction activities going on that DPR is leading. And one of the kind of design languages throughout the park is the use of this great local limestone in kind of unique and maybe atypical ways. And you'll see these blocks you see here in the front, we call them Caliche Blocks, and they're a kind of upper layer of the limestone quarry stone that kind of has an uneven surface, flakes apart a little bit. And you'll see that used in different areas of the park to stabilize slopes. And interestingly, as it kind of erodes and degrades, it can create great opportunities for habitat and plants to establish, which is different from maybe the more traditional limestone block you see a little bit over there on the left, which can be used for walls and other features which might require a smoother surface. Next slide. And here's just some photos of that stone installation going in. This is creating a wall which will help retain a wetland garden that is going in this area. And one of the things we look to do, and here's an image of that wetland garden, is we knew we needed to restore some wetlands, put some wetlands back in place in this location, and that has a lot of ecological benefits. We kind of wanted to elevate beyond that and turn it into a garden feature and an engagement feature. So kind of elevating the diversity of plantings, creating more topographic features, and more adjacent access through the seat wall on the right, through the pathway. So there'll be opportunities for people to get really close to this beautiful wetland complex, engage with it, and also for us to have signage and information sharing kind of the critical function of these spaces. Next slide, please. One other element I'll point out in the southeast corner is this is really the trailhead for the rest of the project. So here you see this arc bridge, we call it, which is this curved bridge structure, which connects that southeast corner wetland experience down to the trail, which moves along Waller Creek all the way to the south. So right now that those middle areas are not fully accessible, there's a lot of improvements to be done. But ultimately, when we've worked our way through the entire project, this will create a ADA accessible trail all along the creek, which connects to Butler Trail at the lake. And this is where it begins. Next slide. This is a shot looking down the creek. And the other story of the southeast corner is really the emergence of water and the beginning of kind of lower Waller Creek. So we'll talk about the floodplain in a moment, or sorry, the flood control tunnel in a moment, and how that's impacted the floodplain, how that's impacted the creek in general. But, you know, essentially this is south of the dam from the flood control facility. And this is where kind of the southern area of Waller Creek, the water reemerges and the new creek begins. And this feature we're looking at here, not only is it beautiful, but it also provides a critical connection for animals to move from the northern reach of Waller Creek to the southern reach of Waller Creek through the dam, which is kind of just below your feet where this photo is taken. You can also see in the image some of that caliche block that I mentioned earlier, making those banks, and you can kind of see how it's already eroding a little bit and plants are starting to establish on top of it there on the right. Next slide. Great, now we're gonna move kind of, begin our journey clockwise around the park and talk about the tunnel, the flood control tunnel and the inlet facility building, which you see there, right there under the cursor. And, you know, one of the interesting things about the park is we're working around this really critical piece of infrastructure and, you know, designing a park which interfaces with that, incorporates the important infrastructure needs that tunnel facility has. The tunnel also allows for all of this to happen. So this flood control tunnel takes approximately 30 acres of downtown along Waller Creek out of the floodplain. And that allows, you know, not only for, you know, properties to redevelop, but it also allows for these public spaces to be turned into parks that won't flood. So they'll be safe, they'll be easier to maintain, and they'll allow us to put people and concerts and events and, you know, rentals and activities and all types of things right down next to the creek, which previously could have been unsafe or unpredictable to plan. And so it's a really critical piece of infrastructure. Here you can see the tunnel pond, and this is basically where all of the water from the northern reaches of Waller Creek and the floodplain comes down and meets the tunnel, which is just kind of to the left off screen. And that tunnel then takes the water, brings it underneath the city, and it pops out at the lake near Butler Trail. So that flood wire is diverted. So everything south of the dam doesn't flood the way it used to. Additionally, this facility you see here gathers debris, you know, mud, other materials which come as part of those flood events and removes them. So you can, there's grabbing equipment that will move the debris off screens and put it into the back of trucks. There's also regular cleanings of this pond so that it really functions and keeps the tunnel itself free of debris. So this critical piece of infrastructure is kind of in the heart of Waterloo Park and really enables the rest of the project to happen.
I just want to say, although you're hearing today from John at the Greenway Conservancy and myself from the Parks and Recreation Department, there are a lot of folks involved from the Watershed Protection Department at the city, and they are critical to the success of our project. So thanks to them too.
Absolutely. Then here's a shot at night showing that. So it also has some beautiful elements as well, including the waterfall and the lighting. And you know, it'll be an interesting experience seeing that from the park, particularly this elevated lawn structure, which goes out over the water. And we'll have signage that will kind of tell, you know, a more detailed version of the story that I just told for park visitors to really understand this critical piece of infrastructure and how really cool it is and beneficial to the city. Next, please. So continuing our journey, now we're going to take a stop in the Hill Country Garden. And that's this area you can see kind of beneath you here in this, you know, southwest corner of the park. Next slide. You know, one of the key things about the Hill Country Garden is there was an opportunity here with these beautiful existing heritage live oaks. It's kind of a rocky hill covered in these low live oaks and that provide a good bit of shade. but also create this unique opportunity to create what we call a hill country garden. So, really what this does is we look to native and adapted plantings that mimic the plantings you see in Texas's beautiful hill country. And we created this garden space, which would, provide the closest thing you can get to that in the heart of the city. So people can experience that on their lunch break and come and enjoy a beautiful garden space to relax in. Here you can see some of the pathways which work their way through those garden spaces. So just kind of a cool project anecdote here. These stones you see here, we call a stone scramble. And this is actually really a stone waste product that a lot of quarries have, kind of the rejects from residential building cladding that you might see everywhere, kind of the houses with the stone facades. And a lot of that was able to just be reused at a relatively low cost and already existed in piles at various quarries and turned into this pathway, which is kind of an optional tertiary pathway to move through the gardens at your own pace. Next slide, please. Here's just another view of those pathways. And so, these plantings are relatively new at the time of this photo, but you can imagine how they'll really grow out and fill in. And this will be a very kind of densely planted hillside, and that pathway will feel, like a place to explore. And so there's kind of those exciting moments of discovery as you engage with those garden spaces. Next slide. Just a view of a hillside. I think this kind of gives you a perspective of those, beautiful old typical live oaks in a very rocky hillside, and kind of shows how a lot of these plantings have to be really particular, native, and very shade tolerant in order to thrive in this environment.
Yeah, I just want to point out here that really our design team, including MBVA, as John said, but also the local landscape architects at DWG and the Wildflower Center all work together for kind of structuring all of the new plantings in the park into their native plant communities that really make sense. So all in all, we've got 95% native plants coming to the site and over 90,000 plants, as well as 500 new trees. So it will be a really robust area of urban ecology in downtown Austin.
Yeah, great point, Lisa. And you can see here, it combines that robust ecology with really kind of those beautiful pops of color and garden moments that can be achieved from using that planting palette. One other element here is, this area is kind of the quieter side of the park. And in order to enhance that and, really provide those opportunities, there's a series of these benches, which are kind of elbowed into shaded areas in between trees. And these benches are custom concrete cast in place benches with this wood topper. And you can see here a perfect example of how they're strategically located to catch as much shade from those existing low live oaks as they can, so that folks can enjoy kind of some shaded moments even during the middle of the day in the park, and maybe escape from their office, maybe bring kids out to enjoy a day in the park. But there's these great little shaded moments with these big communal benches. Next slide, please. And one other key feature here is the story about how we clean and reuse water. And I'll pass it to Lisa to talk a little bit about our cistern and our water treatment facilities here.
Sure. So in the Hill Country Garden, there are a series of 3 rain gardens that are tied together as a treatment train. So this collects, we have a 47,000 gallon cistern that you'll see a little bit later, or you'll see the hatch of a little bit later, which collects all of the rainwater that falls on the performance venue, as well as the Great Lawn, and basically moves it over here to be treated in these 3 rain gardens. And you can move forward here. That was the first one. This is the second one. And there is a third one before it's released into the creek. So here, I think you'll see, as compared to a lot of local, normal sort of standard rain gardens, we've got a really diverse wetland planting here. And I think it's just a great feature, as well as a functional means of treating all of the stormwater on site.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And also similar to the tunnel inlet facility and other things, I think it's an opportunity to engage people and share information about these features in a way, because it's garden-like and because it's in this setting, that's maybe a bit more engaging and helps share that information more widely. This is a view from the entry at the southwest corner of the park. One thing I'll point out here is that throughout the park, we have an extensive lighting plan, and you can see some of those lights here. We spent a lot of time looking at various colors for the metals. We call this Project Gray. It blends in really nicely with the landscape, so it doesn't detract from the kind of very immersive natural experience. Excuse me. But it does provide a high level of lighting for safety throughout the park and moving on the trails in the evening and night hours. And then it also provides some really unique opportunities for kind of playful, fun lighting, which enhance the landscape and kind of that whimsical experience of the park. And we'll see a couple photos later which show that, but this is a good place to show that. Next slide, please. So this is just an aerial view. So we just took the helicopter kind of straight up from where we were just a minute ago, and you can see down over the Hill Country Garden. And one thing I'll point out here is the pathways. We're going to talk in a second about maybe the coolest pathway, but throughout this area we have various pathways serving different purposes. So we kind of have the main circulation pathway, which is a wide pathway. People will be moving slightly quicker. It's up to 14 feet wide to accommodate two-way traffic, maybe even slower moving bicycles. And then we have smaller, narrower pathways, which are intended for kind of slower pace, enjoying the gardens. And you can see those kind of to the right there. And then we have the Scramble, which is kind of the least formal pathway, which is kind of get lost in the garden pathway. Each uses a different surface material, and each has kind of different width, different bends that are kind of aligned with the intended use. And you can get a good view overhead of how all that works its way through the garden spaces. Next slide. Great, so now we're moving on to the Suzanne Deal Booth Skywalk. And this is probably, the coolest little stretch of walkway that you'll see in Waterloo Park. And one of the challenges that we had with the project when we started was this top corner, kind of where the school bus is over 50 feet higher in elevation than the lowest point of the park. And the navigating that is really challenging to begin with, but also we have a goal of universal accessibility for the park, which means we tried to have single pathways which achieved both, the accessible access connection and all other kind of movement through the park. So not having elevators and switchbacks wherever we can avoid them, but having kind of a single all accessible pathway. So that kind of revealed itself to create this great opportunity for this elevated bridge-like structure which snakes through the trees. And you can see it really beautifully here as it works its way around the existing heritage oaks and then encircles the Leverman Plaza, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. So this structure is a concrete structure with this kind of unique kind of boat-like curved bottom, and it's post-tension concrete. And one of the really cool things that, I like to nerd out on, we don't have any photos in here, but it had custom styrofoam formwork for each section to create this sort of boat-like curved bottom. And then the post-tension cables and rebar were integrated above that, and the concrete was poured. So you get this really thin profile of this bright white concrete. And then again, we have these gray legs, which land kind of randomly, seemingly randomly in the garden spaces. So ultimately, when everything grows in, it'll just look like this concrete ribbon moving through the air and in between the trees and over the garden spaces. And here's a view kind of from the other direction. You can see the Capitol in the background and how the Skywalk works its way through those garden spaces and gives that experience of being in the tree canopy. It also has the most incredible views out over the park in any direction you look. So if you look to the north, you see the amphitheater in the background, and you can see all the action going there. If you look to the south, you look down into the garden. If you look below you here, you see the activities happening in the Leverman Plaza. I think it'll be a real hub of activity in the park as people enter. So now we're going to stop at the Leverman Plaza. And this is a great community space, gathering space that's surrounded by the Skywalk and kind of nestled into the landscape. This space is really intended to be kind of the much smaller, more intimate gathering place for small concerts, events, busking, random gatherings, and it has all the infrastructure to support, music or, a children's theater performance or a rental, any of those types of things, but it's much smaller and more intimate than, say, the amphitheater. So if this was all seated, including the stone, you could probably get around 200 people in here comfortably and have some sort of performance going at once. So you can imagine a whole range of different activities and activations that could happen here in this really nice, intimate space. And one of the things I really love when I go on site, which you can see here from this photo, is you get this awesome view from the skywalk down into what's happening below. So it kind of pulls you in. You really wonder what's going on down there and then work your way around and join. And here's a view at night. And this is one of the cool things that I mentioned earlier with the lighting. So the skywalk has integrated into all of the railings these little tiny puck lights which shine light down below on the walking surface and make it safe and accessible in the evenings. And then, so that's kind of our safety lighting. And then you can see throughout the garden spaces what we call these Firefly Bollards, which are these steel bollards which have all these little perforations in them, and they cast this nice kind of pixelated light throughout the gardens. So it's kind of the safety lighting and the more whimsical fun lighting, which creates kind of a lit up space and a safe space. And Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit too about how the lighting works environmentally.
Sure, yeah, all of the light fixtures within the park, so the ones in the rail, the Firefly Bollards, and the pole lights are all full cutoff fixtures, which means that there's no uplighting going on, which is dark skies friendly and habitat friendly for our birds and bats and other creatures that live within the park. In addition, they're all LED, so pretty good from an energy saving standpoint. And from my aspect, like from my perspective, I think they're extremely effective and warm, which is something that I think people have had questions about from an LED fixture standpoint. And I just want to throw some credit to Tillet Lighting Design, who worked on this project as well.
Great point. And that lighting that you see, that's a similar palette throughout the entire project. And we'll show a couple more photos, but the intent is to have that warm, safe, and also enjoyable, beautiful lighting throughout. This area here that we see below, we're looking at now is the family pavilion, and the Kitty King Powell lawn and playscape. So if we want to move to the next slide, we'll start with the Kitty King Powell lawn, and we'll talk specifically about the playscapes. So this lawn is really intended to be kind of the core, the heart of the family activities in the park. And it's really the attractor which will bring families in, and then they can explore the gardens and explore the other spaces through the park. But this is kind of the signal that this is a great place to bring your family and spend the day. And that all really begins with the playscape you see here. And the inspiration for this was the site and also the natural features of it, but also sort of leadership from our partners in the Parks Department and their approach to kind of reinventing play features throughout the city. And Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the direction that the Parks Department's taking with new play features?
Sure. I think there's a lot of direction to include nature-based play. And in this case, natural materials in a traditional play format for all of our parks for residents in Austin. Here, I think we get to have a lot of durable, long-term natural materials. So we'll talk more specifically about the slide. And integrate that so that it is an active cue for kiddos coming to the park that this is a play zone that then can allow them to explore more natural areas like the Scramble pathways that John highlighted in the Hill Country Garden, as well as play opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And now we're taking a closer look at some of those features. So this is a stone slide, and it also has these great kind of climbing features on either side using some more natural stone elements from local quarries. And this stone slide was it's a granite slide, and it was sort of CNC routed in a number of pieces in order to create this structure. And one of the reasons we went with this approach is obviously as Lisa mentioned, it has natural elements, but also the heat factor. We don't want people burning their legs on a metal slide. Or use those plastic materials, which are much less environmentally friendly and honestly can be unsightly in such a natural space. Next.
It's also
Another
extremely
feature,
fun.
yes, it is. And another feature we have here is, one of the things we really want to achieve is play for all ages. And, the way some of these structures can be all ages appropriate, like the slide, in this case, we have kind of a toddler specific feature, which we call mega grass. And so that's intended to look like giant grass, and kids can move in and out of it, kind of play hide and seek and hang on it. And it really kind of anchors this corner of the play area. Next. The biggest structure we have in here we call the log jam, and that is this climber with all these different logs and nets connected together, and it provides sort of different levels of bravery. You can take a different part of the climber and move up a little bit higher. And so there's kind of peaks, there's nets, there's low points you can hang on, and so this will provide play for a wide range of ages. And then in the background there, you can see more of that kind of stone stadium seating in the shade. So parents or caregivers will be able to sit back there and watch kids play from a safe distance, but also enjoy the shade themselves. And there's kind of an aerial view looking at that, and you can see that seating and the netting highlighted. Next, please. Lisa, do you want to touch on some of the recycling and waste features in the park?
Sure. One of the things that you'll note in some of the photos throughout here is often there are 3 bins for collection. So there's going to be a compost as well as a recycling and a landfill option. And while this is a goal of the Parks Department as a whole, I think this may be one of the first implementations of that throughout the park. So just highlighting that there's going to be composting available where there is any food service. In addition, I just want to point out that this tree right behind those 3 bins is one of the largest transplanted trees that came to the site. That was moved just over 2 years ago, and it was moved from the Capitol complex, and it is doing perfectly well. It's fabulous. So we're really appreciative of being able to accept that tree and give it a new home.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lisa. And one of the things that tree highlights is the partnerships which go into this work. I mean, this was a partnership between the state, the city, and a nonprofit entity in order to move and save this tree, about 7 blocks. And that was a big undertaking. But I mean, look at it. It looks great, and it really anchors the space, so it's all worth it. Next slide, please. Great. Now we're moving over to the area we call the Family Pavilion. And this is a rendering from Michael Shue Office of Architecture, a great local architecture firm who's worked with us on a number of projects. And they designed this building, the Family Pavilion, which you can see in the background. One thing I'll say here about that is, and here's a photo of what it looks like now. Originally, we had discussed having kind of a more traditional brick and mortar restaurant space in the park. And we started designing that, started thinking about how it would be operated. And then we did a series of community engagement meetings around food service and other ways to kind of enhance the family experience of Waterloo Park. And overwhelmingly, we got feedback that a restaurant wasn't really the right thing for the park, and that there was a preference for more flexibility of food trucks and more options, lower price. And we took that feedback to heart, adjusted course, and the restaurant building became the Family Pavilion, which is a restroom building with storage rooms that support programs and food service in the park. And then food truck areas were installed, and there's one on the left and one on the right. There's the 2. And that will be the home of food trucks, which will kind of be here on long-term temporary contracts and be able to serve food to patrons in the park. So that's a really cool moment where we got some great feedback from the community, and it changed the park for the better. Also, it led to this beautiful Family Pavilion building that we're about to look at. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. One thing I'll point out before we look at some more detailed shots is these are just the water fountains in the park. So we've got you covered no matter what you like. We've got the lower one, the higher one, the dog bowl, and the bottle filler. And we really want to encourage people to stay hydrated. I love water, and make sure that there's lots of options to use reusable bottles. And keep your dogs hydrated as well. Next slide, please. So here's another rendering of the intent of the design intent of that building. And the idea was we really wanted to nestle this concrete structure into the hillside and have it be sort of a relative of the big amphitheater building with its own unique characteristics. We also, after engagement with a lot of our partner parks throughout the country, heard a lot about how critical it is to have hand washing options, even if it's not a restroom option. We heard from so many parks, we just wish we had more sinks. The line just to wash my kids' hands is so long, and we always have a backup. And so we designed this structure to move the sink into this beautiful cast in place pedestal concrete sink in the middle, and move the restrooms as their own individual unisex restrooms on the left that don't have sinks, so that more folks can wash their hands at once. One of the things that the pandemic has shown us is even further how important it is to have access to regular available hand washing. So, this will hopefully help us cut down on the restroom lines and more effectively utilize the space. I'll also point out that we wanted to keep this room very open. If a lot of people are coming and going using a sink at once, we want it to be open, bright, inviting, not feel like you're not supposed to go in there with someone else. And so we did that by, opening the space up on this side and then planting that back wall. So that'll have, it's open to the sky back there, and it also has plantings which will creep up the wall and create kind of this green grotto space in there. Next slide, please. And here's just some kind of glamour shots of that sink in the middle. It really turned out great, and it's this very unique concrete feature in the middle that also is accessible on both sides. Next, please. And here you can just get a shot of how that building is really tucked into the hillside and emerges from it, and then the landscape kind of cascades down into the building on the backside there. Next, please. Here's another shot at night, again giving you a sense of some of the lighting. In the future, there will be, it'll be brighter here, and there'll be a food truck on either side of this photo serving food in the evening. All right, now we're taking our next step over to the Meredith Plaza. And this is a beautiful deck and plaza around the two biggest and probably oldest trees on the site. And here they are right here, two great heritage live oaks. The idea here, and you can get a great sense of it from this photo, is this will be the shaded seating where people will bring their food after they purchase it over at those food trucks, or just, hang out, read a book, play chess, enjoy the shade under these two great trees. There you go. Also, it was, one of the things that we did here was custom build this structure, and you can kind of get a sense of it, in the background there where the deck's not closed up yet. It was custom built around these trees to avoid any negative impacts on the roots. So we have individual, uniquely placed foundations. We extensively surveyed the trees to avoid any negative impacts. And you can see how that's going in over there on the kind of top side of the screen. And really it was focused on preservation of those trees and utilization of their beautiful shade to enhance the experience. Great. Next slide, please. And here's just a view looking, towards the amphitheater. One of the cool moments is all the different grade changes. So the difference in elevation from one side to another. And here you can see, we'll go to the Caliche Plaza in a moment, but you can see how you enter off the street, go under kind of the man-made canopy that is the building, and then pass through the, nature-made canopy, which is these beautiful trees before you enter into the park. Next slide. Here's an aerial shot looking down on the canopy of the Moody Amphitheater. One of the things I'll point out here is you can see kind of that shiny surface up there. That is a glass system, a skylight system, which keeps the rain off the stage and off the plaza. So there's rain protection there. Also, this is probably the best image to give you a sense of the nearly 5 miles of steel that were used to build this sort of cloud-like, tree canopy-like structure. All these individual members stacked on top of each other to create this great shaded and protected space below. Next. Here's a view looking straight on. So as I said, this is the Moody Amphitheater. This amphitheater will host shows up to around 5,000 attendees in capacity. And so there'll be a range of events from community performances to contemporary music, rock show type performances, all in this space. And that's really one of the goals, to kind of restore that function to this park that it historically served. Also, this image is really good for pointing out one of the things that's changed from its days previously as a place for events. Previously, like many other parks in Austin, all of the infrastructure to put on an event had to be brought in on trucks, loaded into a park on the grass, disrupting the environment, disrupting habitat, and then it all had to be loaded out after the event and mitigated. In this case, we built all of that into the hillside behind these concrete walls. So there are restrooms, concessions, dressing rooms, offices, all capable of supporting up to a 5,000 capacity event without the need for any temporary infrastructure like portable toilets. And obviously that makes, production of these events easier. It limits the negative impacts on the park, and it makes the ability to flip this from an event one night to an open park space with a lawn the next day really easy. Basically, everything gets loaded out, the doors are locked and closed to the private spaces, and then the park reopens, which is one of the goals of the space as well.
In addition, when it's in show mode, that doesn't preclude folks from being in the park itself or using that park restroom or play features that we were talking about earlier. So it can do kind of a both and as the hardworking park that it will be.
Yeah, great point. Even the biggest events will only close a relatively small area of the park because of the way it's designed. And you can see kind of these concrete walls that help achieve that. Here, just another view of that canopy structure reaching out over the lawn. I like to look at all the photos of the different ways it casts shadows on the ground. It really shows you kind of that beautiful dappled light and the shade it casts there. Next. So one of the cool things we did recently is we did an initial sound test in order to make sure that we could put on a concert, but also wouldn't be disturbing any neighbors, and we're complying with all necessary sound laws and ordinances. And this is imagery from that test. So it's kind of the first look at what a concert might look like on stage. It was very cool to hear music going in the amphitheater.
In addition, in these couple of shots, you can see right in this concrete area under the tips of the canopy is where that large 47,000 gallon cistern is that collects all of the rainwater from the Moody Amphitheater and pumps it over to the rain garden that you all have seen before. While we're talking about water, I feel like we also should be talking about the rest of the water use for the park. And I just want to highlight that every single one of our flush fixtures, so all of the toilets and urinals in the Moody Amphitheater building, as well as the restroom facility that we talked about, are all sourced with the reclaimed water. So the city's Purple Pipe program coming from Trinity Street. So there's no potable water being used to flush toilets here. In addition, there's no potable water used for any of the irrigation within the park. So it's a water-wise design all around.
Great, and now we're gonna talk a little bit about the plaza above the amphitheater. We'll talk about the Matz and McHale Plaza in a moment, but this plaza space really is a shaded areas up under the canopy above the stage, and so kind of below us right now is loading dock, back of house, offices, and this just really shows that the public experience of the space is not inhibited by the private necessities of operating these types of events and shows. It's occupiable. Next slide, please. And that includes use of green roofs throughout. So a lot of these green roofs really integrate seamlessly into the landscape because it is built into a hillside, and they're extensively planted above kind of those back of house rooms that include offices and other utilities. And a cool shot with the Capitol there in the background. So next we're going to talk quickly about the elevated lawn, and this is a view looking down to the stage from that lawn. So one of the impacts of having such a large flood control tunnel in a park was there's a lot of space needed in order to have a pond where all the water from the northern reaches of Waller Creek could come and make its way into the tunnel. That pond kind of cut into the park space that was previously there, and one of the ways that we sort of reclaim, so to speak, some of that park space is to build an elevated lawn, much like a highway bridge that decks out over the pond. And so this shot is taken from kind of standing on that lawn in kind of the blanket seating area of a show or the shaded area where you'll sit down and enjoy a picnic in the park. Next slide. And here's a view of that lush grass. It's really, really nice to walk on right now. I know I'm not supposed to, but it's very squishy and soft, and it's looking really great. Next slide. One thing I'll point out before I talk a little bit more about the structure is we also relocated a number of trees onto that structure. So there were existing trees on site that were impacted in various ways, and we relocated them to be on top of this elevated deck structure. They will continue to grow and provide shade for the lawn and for the patrons who will sit there. Next. And here's another relocated tree. Looking a little wintry in that photo, but it's doing fine. And a third one. And so those kind of anchor the back of the lawn and provide shade. And here's a view of that elevated lawn structure stretching out over the pond. So you can see how it kind of takes cues from highway bridges. And one of the cool collaborations was when the tunnel inlet facility was being built, that structure in the middle there called the vane, which keeps the water from kind of whirlpooling, integrated a number of sleeves that we were able to put columns down into, which supported this lawn ultimately. So a real collaborative effort in order to bring back approximately a half acre of lawn space and create that kind of high elevated point for the back lawn of the amphitheater. Next slide. And here's just an aerial view looking, towards the southeast. Next slide. And then we're going to move our way towards the Matson McHale Plaza. And that is this area, as we're walking to the north along Trinity Street, got these great gardens to our right and green roofs. And then one of the primary entrances to the park will be on this plaza. Next slide. And one of the cool things you can see here is because of the grade change, it turns from a ramp to a stair, and which sort of cuts into the sidewalk. And then there's this great plaza area underneath the protection of that canopy. I think this will end up being a really kind of iconic moment and entrance into the park. You've got this beautiful architecture reaching out over the sidewalk and towards the street. And will be, this will be the place you'll probably ask people to meet you. You'll get off the future train system we have, and you'll hop out and you'll walk over here and meet your friend in the plaza and then work your way into the park. And it really has this beautiful moment where that architecture embraces the street. And this is a good view of that at night. You can also see how the lighting scheme here really lights it up like a cloud or a tree canopy over the park in the evening. Great, we can move on to the next. We're going to talk about a couple of features in the northeast corner of the park here. And this in particular, this creek restoration work is really cool. As Lisa pointed out, one of the primary partners in this endeavor is the Watershed Protection Department. And much of the work that we're doing down the creek is restoration of the creek, or really rebuilding of the creek. It's so degraded and eroded. And this area between 14th and 15th Street is really our first, step into rebuilding Waller Creek to serve kind of its new function and create this great new habitat. Next. And this, as I said, it was rebuilding. I mean, restoration does not give credit to the level of work and the scale of these efforts. This area is north of the flood control tunnel, so it doesn't receive the flood protection benefits that the southern areas of Waller Creek will. So it needs to be really hardy and robust to resist the floodwaters and direct those floodwaters to the tunnel. So that's why here you'll see a wider channel, a lot of stone. And again, you can see a lot of that caliche block on the sides, which will create habitat and sort of erode a little bit over time. Also, you can see kind of the soil nails going in the green, which will stabilize that bank and allow for it to not move or be undercut like some of these areas were historically. Next slide. And then here's a shot which is closer to the final product we're seeing. And you can see that it's a combination of some of the stone and also a lot of green approaches to stabilizing the banks. The water will come very high up the slope. So you can see in the sides of the slope, these logs and stumps. We call this Stumpery, and it's actually, we're saving on-site stumps and trees that had to be removed and then anchoring them into the banks of the creek to help stabilize it and also create great little habitat areas for animals to establish. Next. And here's a shot looking down the creek. So one of the cool things I like about this shot as the bank on the left was done first, and so it represents the kind of before or the after of what the bank on the right is going to look like in just a few months. So it looked like that a while ago, and it's had a chance to establish, and you can kind of see how green and lush that looks and how nice of a habitat it would be for a turtle or a frog or anything else that would like to take its chance over there.
Red-tailed hawks. We've seen them out there.
There you go. Next slide. Last place we're going to stop is one of the main entrances into the park. This is the Farmer Bridge. It's a historic road bridge. Used to be the 14th Street Bridge, which moved across the creek here. It's really one of the main entries, as I said, when folks will join the park and enter from Red River Street, and you can see that here. So during a show, this will be kind of the main queuing area. People will enter here, get their tickets scanned, and enjoy a show. During normal park use, a lot of folks will enter the park this way. You know, we have bike parking over here. There's a lot of access opportunities from Red River Street. So a real kind of main entrance into the park, and also an opportunity to see both the creek restoration to the north and the tunnel inlet facility and that structured lawn to the south. And we'll have some signage, some interpretive signage there, which will really tell the stories of kind of both of those things and offer an engagement opportunity for people to learn a bit more about what it takes to restore or rebuild a creek like this. Next one. I think we're going to end here. This is just an aerial view kind of showing the whole park. And it's a little bit older. You can see the grass isn't quite as green as it is today, but this is the 11 acres of Waterloo Park.
Thanks, John and Lisa. We just got to the end of our tour, and we're going to open it up to questions. If any of y'all tuning in have any questions, we're happy to answer them. One question we got was about how the plants and the landscape are doing after the snowstorm.
That's a great question. And if it's all right, I'm going to take that one, John. We have been very, very carefully examining how the plants are doing, including the new tree plantings and the transplants since the snowpocalypse and the ice storm afterwards. And so far, they are looking very good. So overall, we have a lot of good survivability, and many of them are doing very well. There are a couple of species in particular that didn't do so well, and we're going to look at replacing a few of those. But so far, so good. So I don't know, I'm sure it mirrors what a lot of you all are seeing in your own yards and other locations in Austin. But we've got some prickly pear, some particular species of aloe and agave, and some mountain laurel that may or may not fully recover. But otherwise, all good. Thanks.
Yeah, it's great to see the park turning green again. It's looking really nice these days. Let's see, we got a question on Facebook from Brittany. Who's the best contact to discuss events? You can email us at info@waterloogreenway.org. We'd be happy to chat with you. Question about Red River. Is Red River going to be open for traffic? So it's currently under construction right now. I don't know if y'all want to touch on that.
Yeah, sure. So, Red River is closed for construction right now. Red River itself is being relocated and straightened through the former Central Health kind of hospital site right there. So it's going to be a straight shot all the way up in the future. Our long-term plans for the old Red River, current Red River, are to have that closed and use that as kind of a pedestrian promenade space, which will be supportive of park use. So you might imagine, street fairs, tents, those types of things there, as well as some wider, more generous bicycle and pedestrian connections between Red River and moving up into the university. So that will be sort of the long-term plan for that once new Red River is opened next year.
Looking forward to that, definitely. Let's see, when is the grand opening? Which is very exciting. We're really excited to reopen Waterloo Park this summer, and we'll be announcing pretty soon an opening date. So keep an eye on our social media, website, and subscribe to our newsletter at waterloogreenway.org, and you'll be the first to know as soon as we announce our plans for reopening. Let's see, we have a question about which consultants and city departments have played a role in this project, which I know we touched on kind of throughout. There's a lot of people involved, but if we can just kind of do a brief recap.
Well, I'll just start by saying so many, and it's been many different contributors in all different aspects of the project. On the design consultant side, our two lead designers were Michael Van Valkenburg and Associates and Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners for the architecture. And then we had a great team of local sub-consultants who worked under them, including some folks we mentioned earlier who have kind of played prime local roles, including Michael Shue, Office of Architecture, and DWG Landscape Design folks. And beneath that, you know, a whole team, and it would happy to share that information if anyone wants to reach out, and we can share a full list of our great team. And then for the city departments, I can let Lisa talk a little bit about that, but kind of our primary two sponsoring departments are the Parks and Recreation Department and the Watershed Protection Department.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other folks in other city departments who really help us and help support. So I don't want to leave them out either. This is a comprehensive partnership between the City of Austin and the Waterloo Greenway Conservancy.
We had another question about if and how COVID has impacted construction on site.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that, and I'm sure Lisa can too. I mean, I think, you know, credit to our construction manager for quickly implementing policies which kept the construction site safe and moving forward. And that's what's happened. I mean, there were significant modifications to ensure safety on site, and those are still ongoing today. But we were able to keep construction moving throughout. You know, everyone experienced some delays and impacts from the global impacts of COVID on timing and schedule and availability of materials and labor. But overall, we've been very fortunate and due in large part to a lot of good planning and adjustments to keep the project on track throughout.
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of really high-tech and detailed safety protocols put in place, including a contact tracing app, a temperature scan, and a daily wristband for anybody entering the site. And as well as a lot of modifications that have been made, including a tour like this one. So unfortunately, we're not able to take all of you out there today, and we're doing this virtual tour instead, but construction continues.
Yes, and I think we have enough time for just one more question. Let's see. Can you speak to any of the inspiration behind the planning and design of the park itself?
Oh, it's a big question. How much time do we have? You know, I think we mentioned some of the things, and, you know, a lot of it was taking cues from the history of the space and the uses, and also looking at parks around our community and feedback from the Parks Department about, you know, what works and what doesn't work to achieve those desired uses of our community park users. And then, you know, one of the major inspirations for our design team, for our landscape design team, was really taking cues from Waller Creek and from the flows of water. And you can see kind of that in the shapes and forms of the pathways as they move throughout the park. On the architecture side, you know, we mentioned it a little bit, but one of the big design cues was that tree canopy and how it casts that beautiful shade on parks, and how kind of great in Central Texas of an experience that live oak canopy is, and sitting down under it and having that kind of dappled light around you. And so the canopy takes some cues from that as well and tries to create that experience in a really, you know, unique and engaging way. I could keep going. Lisa, anything to add on your part? I know we only have a couple minutes. I could keep going.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. There's all sorts of inspiration, and we've been really blessed with a fantastic design team all around. So even though we can't list all of their names out here because we would inevitably forget somebody, they are all fantastic, and we thank them.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. Thank you so much, Lisa. for presenting today's Waterloo Park virtual tour. Just want to say a quick thank you to our program sponsors before we end: BBVA, the Powell Foundation, and the Powell Foundation. Like I said, this tour is available to watch on our Facebook page and will be live on our website later today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Get outside for Earth Day.
Yes, happy Earth Day. Bye, y'all.